Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Hope you can hear us. So, first of all, congratulations for having made it to the final session of today. Must have been an inspiring day for all of you. For this last hour, we're in between drinks and we're out here. So, I hope that you will be excited to hear what we have to say. I think probably this is the most important panel because it's all about innovation. If you think about the fact that we have to achieve net zero in 2050, you zoom out a bit and you try to think of the humongous task that we have ahead of us, we cannot do it without innovation. So my name is Michel Chatelain. I'm a lawyer. I'm a partner at Osborne Clarke. We dedicate our time to promote the energy transition by providing legal advice. And we also are very much in favor of sustainability, believing in sustainability. So, what we're about to discuss today is the question, how do we use innovation, technology, and collaboration to drive the energy transition and to build a low-carbon future? I have here an excellent panel, so let me introduce them first. First of all, there's Nicola Tong. She's an Associate Director at Coca-Cola, Euro-Pacific Partners. Then we have Liam Brennan, Director at Tokamak Energy. Øystein Jensen, Chief Sustainability Officer at Odfjell. Jart van Ingen, Founder and CEO of Get Focus. And Katie Backshaw, Director Specialized in Project Finance at Santander UK. So let's kick off, and I'll give them each 1 minute to tell us what's the one innovation in the energy sector that excites you most and why? Nicola.
Hi, thanks. So I would suggest anything that can help create energy from waste. So we need a transition towards more renewable energy. And if corporates like ours can use waste products such as wastewater, for example, to create energy, then we're reducing our reliance on the grid, which allows the grid to provide more clean, renewable energy at a lower cost to those that aren't able to self-generate.
Nice.
Yeah. So I want to talk about really about high temperature superconductors. For me, and kind of where we're working at, they're a system level unlocker. The zero resistance allows you to transfer current over long distances, over short distances, to create current in pathways that gives you magnets that essentially allows massive potential. For me, I see it as a transformative technology along the lines that we see other transformative technologies impacting society now in terms of AI. But fusion and high temperature superconductors together unlocks energy, unlocks limitless energy.
That's super exciting.
Yeah, so yes, I'm from Odfjell. We're a shipping company, so that means that we're operating large tankers. So with regards to the energy efficiency and what the technology that excites me most, I would like to go back in time. Because what we are doing now is that we are harnessing wind, and we have just fitted a quite modern, large chemical tanker, 55,000 tons tankers with sails. And we have got some tremendous results on that, quite a new sales. So from my perspective, I think that is a very old-fashioned technology that we now can see that we have getting a lot of benefits from.
Love to see that one.
Yeah, so for me personally, Jart van Ingen, CEO and co-founder of Get Focus. We're a technology forecasting company. So what that means is we can measure how quickly technologies are getting better and cheaper. And I think the most exciting development is in the field of batteries. So batteries or storage is really the big open question in the energy transition. We know how to generate lots and lots of energy, but most of the renewable sources are intermittent. And the big question is, how are we going to store that energy? And when it comes to storage, batteries are among the fastest improving technologies out there, meaning that what we're starting to see now with larger scale battery storage is really only the beginning. Batteries are going to get a lot better, they're going to get a lot cheaper, and that's what I'm most excited about.
Storage. Katie.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm going to really cheat with my answer to this question, Michelle, sorry. I'm going to say there's no one technology or innovation that really excites me. For me, the exciting thing is the scale of the challenge and the vast range of technologies that that's going to demand, and the pace at which we're going to have to see change and innovation and new things coming through. And it's that huge opportunity that I think is really exciting at this point.
Thank you. So that's a wide range of innovations being called. I think we only have 1 hour. We could talk about it the rest of the night, I would say. So let's dig a bit deeper and start with tech. So Liam, so tokamak energy is, let's say, pushing the boundaries really with fusion energy. So what emerging technology do you see as the biggest game changer for the energy transition in the next decade? And what barriers do you see that we have to overcome?
In the next decade, so just to give you a little bit of background, Tokamak Energy, we're a nuclear fusion company, UK-based. We formed in 2009, spun out of the UK Atomic Energy Agency, and have been developing technologies to enable fusion since, so over the past 16 years. And that's a massive challenge, massive scientific hurdle, but actually where we're seeing it now is transitioning that scientific hurdles into engineering and then economics. And ultimately to get to a point where energy on the grid from a nuclear fusion reactor becomes economically viable and ultimately accessible to everyone. Through that transition and through that work, we've been developing technologies along the way. And your question really relates to in the next 10 years, actually we're starting to see spin-outs from the work that we're doing on our journey to fusion, which being pragmatic, being realistic, the UK government have set STEP projects, spherical tokamak for energy production. That's been set to have energy to the grid in 2040. We are supporting and working towards that with the UK government. But ultimately, we're looking for how we can make an impact earlier. And what we've also developed and what we're also working on is actually high temperature superconductors. These are technologies that actually superconductors have been around since the 70s. Since the 60s, it was developed in Oxford. Actually, the first superconductors were low temperature, and they're actually in our modern day MRI systems. They have impacted our society immensely. So MRIs have been developed in the 70s and 80s, and ultimately are now in every major hospital in the world. The next transition in that technology is high temperature superconductors, which operates at 20 Kelvin, which is a very, very low temperature, minus 253 degrees. However, actually, there's a tipping point after happening in the last 10 years. There's a transition point where what became a science and what became a kind of science fiction has actually become real in the last 10 years. It's become real because actually, through the work of us and a few other companies across the world, we're now making products that can actually utilize superconductors and utilize them to transfer current. Utilize them to transfer current to create fields, magnetic fields that harness, that can actually hold the power of the sun. So just a number of years ago, we, through our work at building a spherical tokamak on our side, we created a spherical tokamak that actually had 100 million degrees. That's 10 times more hotter than the center of the sun. And that's what superconductors can achieve going forward in the future, is the ability to create limitless power. But it can also step beyond that in the next 10 years, actually. It can step beyond that in a power transmission, power delivery approach. So there's a range of other companies out there at the moment who are actually taking superconductors and delivering power, distributing power through lossless transmission. And that's amazing, because actually, we look to, I suppose, always push out supply. But if we reduce down the demand, either through demand side or actually through efficiency gains, then you don't need to push out supply. You can work with what supply you have or actually increase supply to increase innovation. And superconductors enables that.
I was wondering, Nicola, for you, from a point of view of Coca-Cola, is that something you're looking at? Superconductors?
Not so much in terms of specifically superconductors. So if you think of an industry like Coca-Cola and the industry that we work in, the range of technologies available to us is huge. So when we're looking at renewable energy, we can look at solar, we can look at wind, we can look at things like heat pumps. So we're looking at established technologies, which we know how to implement, that will help us reach our net zero goals. And then my role in Ventures is to look at very, very early stage technologies. So the likes of superconductors and nuclear, for example, are things that we would consider, but we would be thinking about how can we specifically use them within our own operations, or how do we help our suppliers use these kind of technologies as well? Because over 90% of our greenhouse gas emissions are scope 3, they come from our suppliers. So we also have to work really, really closely with our suppliers and say, what technologies are you implementing in your supply chain to enable you to reach your net zero goals?
Jart, do you have a view on the scalability of a new technology like fusion?
Well, we have looked into fusion. There's many different approaches to fusion, but fusion as a whole is not among the faster improving energy-related technologies out there. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's not an interesting technology. That just means that you shouldn't expect progress to be extremely rapid. And another thing that we find is that improvement rates, as we can measure them, are largely or strictly related to how complicated the science and the engineering behind it is. So there's basically two variables that predict how fast a technology gets better. One we call cycle time, which measures how many years does it take for a field of technology to produce a new generation of itself. And the other one we call knowledge flow, which looks at once that happens, how much does it get cited by subsequent steps of innovation. And cycle time is more important than knowledge flow. And if you look at fusion, right, it's so complex and it takes so much capital that in order to do your next experiment, it's going to take a lot of time to get that done. Same applies to nuclear. And some other fields, but for something like a solar panel, for example, if I want to make a better solar panel, sure, I need some tools and I need to experiment a little, but it's not a matter of many years to run a new experiment, and I don't need hundreds of millions of pounds to do it. Which is why solar is still among the fastest improving technologies when it comes to energy generation. It has already gotten a lot cheaper, and we expect that trend to continue ferociously up to the point where solar will be so laughably cheap that it is already transformative, but it will become much more transformative than what we've seen so far.
Yeah. Apart from tech, Øystein, I mean, that's half the story. I think collaboration is key in energy transition. So Odfjell as a company operates in a high intensity industry, basically, energy intensity industry. So how do you think can cross-sector collaboration, let's say between corporates or startups or financiers, help to improve energy transition innovations?
Yes, so the shipping industry represents about 2.5% of the world's global CO2 emissions. And it is by some regarded as a hard-to-abate sector. And because it's today, if you're going to transport large volumes over large distances, there are really no other commercial alternatives than to using a combustion engine and using a traditional fuel. So that is the big challenge. So there's no kind of very easy solution that you can do tomorrow. But I don't really like the term hard to abate. I'd like to either to call it the kind of the big opportunity sector. In order to do that, for us as a ship owner and operator, we can only take responsibility for the fuel when it's come to the tank on board our ships, and then we burn it and then we produce energy to push the ship forward. In order, before the fuel can get there, then you need all the infrastructure in place. So you need very strong collaborations with the fuel providers, with the infrastructure, with the legislation, because today we have been using that same old fossil fuel for a long period of time. It's regulated, and if you're going to switch to an alternative fuel, that will need a new regulation. They will need new permits. It will need new technology, both on board and on shore, in order to do that. So for the shipping industry itself to do that itself, that's not something that you can handle yourself. So that means that you have to collaborate, and you need to sort of set the demand for alternative fuel. So that means that you can give clarity to infrastructure providers, to fuel suppliers, to develop technology to do that. And it's not a very cheap thing to do either. So you need to have support from financial measures as well. And what we have done in Odfjell is that we have actually done to sustainability-linked financing framework with a strong collaboration with financing and with the banks. So we have a transition financing framework. That means that we are allocating capital to transition activities with a premium on the price. And we have also a sustainability-linked bond or sustainability-linked financing framework with a trajectory and targets that we need to achieve in order to use that fund. So there are multiple different providers or partners that we need to do, that the industry needs to work with, and of course we would need new technology as well. And as I mentioned in my introduction with regards to the sales, that is something that, yes, sales have been around for a long period of time, but the actual sales that we are using, those sales that we have bought and put on our vessels, that was developed by a startup, by two aviation engineers in Spain. Two young people, they developed that company, and now managed to sell and scale that up through, and they have been supported by the EU and other financing as well. But just a good example of a kind of a startup that we are using, and I think that will get a lot of traction going forward. So this challenge is something that is bigger than we can handle ourselves.
Yeah, part of what you say reminds a bit of what we call innovative purchasing. So by formulating a functional description of what you want, then ask the market to come up with solutions rather than describing the solutions.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that actually the best example for me as a Norwegian, the best example of that is the Norwegian ferries. So the government said that, okay, we want to have a net zero ferry crossing the fjords. It's not a big distance, but you need to cross the fjords. So we said that we wanted to do that electric or net zero, but that was not available at that time. So we said that, okay, we don't care, we're going to pay for that. So you're using the purchasing power, as you say, to drive innovation. And suddenly you started to develop that market. Now almost all ferries in Norway are electric and net zero. The first one was quite terrible. They didn't have time enough to charge, and as you mentioned, the capacity of the batteries. So now things are really developed. So that was the first green corridor that was developed by the purchasing power of kind of some brave politicians.
Excellent, Katie. I just want, from a finance perspective, how do you see those partnerships coming together? Are there any examples of deals that made it work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think every deal that we work on in providing funding is absolutely entirely reliant on collaboration and partnership. We come in reasonably late in the process often to try and find a funding solution that works. And so the area of financing that I specialise in is project finance, where we're not looking to take reliance on a corporate to back things up if it goes wrong. We are entirely reliant on a project doing what we expect it to do and generating the revenue and the cash flow that we expect. And to get comfortable with that, to identify any risks that exist and work out how we mitigate or accept those, we're really reliant on close sponsor relationships, so with the equity that's going in to develop those projects, but all the market advisors as well, so that we really understand where we're putting our funding. But I think the other really interesting piece of collaboration that we spend a lot of time working on as a team in Santander is our collaboration with government and understanding what we can do to support their policy changes and making sure that we're helping to drive the Clean Power 2030 and the net zero ambitions more broadly. So a good example of that, we've been involved in co-chairing the energy work stream of the British Infrastructure Task Force. So that's a task force that the government set up actually before they came into government, looking at how the private sector can help mobilise funding to really generate that change and transition at speed to try and hit the government's really ambitious targets. So loads going on, and all of it requires collaboration.
Yeah, collaboration is really key. So let's jump into business models and market trends, and I want to ask Jart. So Get Focus is all about bold strategy, so to say. So what new business models or market trends are reshaping the energy markets in the UK and Europe? And how can they drive the investment in sustainable solutions?
So we're not so focused on business models, we're really focused on technology trends. So it all started for us with a collaboration with MIT, and MIT has had a research institute that has studied technological change for about 25 years, and they ask questions like, why does one technology win, why does one not, what is Moore's law, why does one go fast and the other doesn't, etc. And at some point we figured that we had a lot of ideas, but we didn't have any data. So we started to empirically measure how do technologies actually evolve over time. So we measured their performance and we measured their cost. And what you find when you do that is that every technology improves exponentially, and they all improve at a relatively fixed rate over time. So not just semiconductors have a Moore's law, everything seems to have its own Moore's law. And what we also found is you can predict that with the metrics that I talked about earlier. So in terms of the trends that we're seeing, like I mentioned earlier, the solar for energy generation is getting cheaper faster than everything else. Wind is a close second, so expect a lot more solar, a lot more wind. And then when it comes to energy storage, it's the batteries of various types. Like LFP is already dominating more than half of the market right now. Slightly more long-term, what we're really excited about is sodium-ion, because that's still improving faster than LFP and holds a lot of potential. So expect a lot more sustainable energy generation, and also expect a lot more battery storage. Also in terms of companies or business models that are able to take advantage of both those technologies continuing to rise, I think will be winning solutions.
Oh, that's super exciting. Fascinating that you can look into the future. And that's why people are telling me that they expect battery costs and electric vehicles or trucks, basically, the cost per kilometer to go below the ones on noble fossil fuels within the next 2 to 3 years. Is that something you can confirm?
Well, it depends on exactly what it is that they're doing and exactly which types of technologies that they're using.
Let's say electric trucks and basically, you'd use the batteries for storage.
Yeah, so like for electric trucks, like it depends on the use case. So like like relatively short distances, I wouldn't be surprised if within the next 2 to 3 years that happens. I think for longer distances, you really need higher energy densities. We think there the most promising technologies are actually silicon anode technologies. Most people are focused on solid state batteries. We see silicon anodes improving a lot faster. Problem with silicon anode is that with increased silicon concentration, you get significant expansion of the anode, and that tends to break them. But there, what we see is carbon nanotubes are getting a lot cheaper. They act sort of as a cage for that. Those TRLs are now at around 7 in most cases. So it will take a few more years before they reach mass market. But once they do, you'll get batteries with much higher energy densities. And I think then also long distance trucking will be cheaper and better and much more convenient with when they're electrified.
Just for, I wonder, Liam.
If I can comment
go
on
ahead,
that, coming again from Norway, 9 out of 10 cars sold is electrical cars now in Norway. So that means that something can happen, and again, it's about kind of the being bold government of doing some initial subsidization or cutting the tax on EVs, and now almost all cars, new sold cars in Norway are electrical.
Yeah, so it's financially different. Liam.
Actually, it's really interesting what Jard is saying, and in one sense, I agree. And fusion for us, Jard, you're right. It is slow. Actually, it's slow because actually there's a limited of expertise, there's a high scientific hurdle, limited expertise, and limited investment. We're at a panel here driving the energy transition. But actually what Jard has just said, that you drive, technology goes at the rate you drive it at, and all technologies have a fundamental Moore's law. From essence then, something like fusion, something like solar panels, something like silicon anodes, in essence, all of them take financing. All of them take risk capital that needs to go in that then needs to take that risk to really drive and accelerate forward. And fusion is a classic one of this. 10 years ago, fusion was the endeavour of governments. It was ITER out in France, who'd started in the 90s and is still building. But actually now, fusion is the endeavour of VCs, who are putting more and more money in. 7 billion over the last 3 years have been put into fusion and fusion startups. There's 50 fusion startups across the world, each pioneering their own version, many different types. But that driving the energy transition is actually fueling a catalyst for change, fueling a catalyst that allows us to essentially have unlimited energy in the future. Now, listening to Yard, you may question actually if solar panels, wind and batteries come together, then actually we may have another solution. But that's great, because actually we can't afford to have one route to achieving this. We need many different routes, because I'm not sure all the routes will reach a time where we are from 2050. So we need to really push forward. We need to get more investment into all of these areas fundamentally, because we don't know which is going to win out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we need it.
Yeah, we all need it. So don't get discouraged. Get encouraged by this model. Nicola, the trends that are you using these kind of trend predictions as well for Coca-Cola or not?
Yeah, I would say from a trend perspective, again, to what Yard was saying, a lot of the technologies that are available and have been available for some time are coming down in price, which allows us to then say, well, we can use these technologies, we can buy them, we can procure them, they can be part of our supply chain. And then what I find really interesting about trends within energy is the newer technologies are starting to think about how they can finance themselves differently. So instead of saying to a corporate like ours, you need to have a huge amount of capex to install this equipment on your facility, which makes it cost prohibitive, they're thinking about how they can work with the likes of Katie and say, right, well, how can we get financing in place which allows us to offer things like energy as a service? And when they start to offer energy as a service, you end up with a business model which is more lucrative to the company that's developing it because they get a long-term revenue stream, but it makes it accessible for a company like ours to say, okay, we can do that because we're going to save cost at the same time as moving to renewable energy. And I think that's a really big trend.
Right. Yeah. Making the bridge to finance them. So this is a great insight. So, Katie, Santander UK, let's say, is at the forefront of project finance. That's what you said. What financial mechanisms or policy changes are critical to scaling energy transition technologies? And do you see any gaps in that respect?
Yeah, I think, without doubt, there are gaps. And I think for all of us on the panel, all of us in the industry, doing anything as kind of first of a kind brings with it its own challenges, right? Whether that's because you're Liam doing a really cutting edge technology, which I won't profess to understand, or whether you're coming at it as a funder looking to provide a funding solution that takes it, a solution up to scale. There's lots of new, and that inevitably brings challenges. For us, when we're thinking through those challenges, we're often thinking through the risks, as I said before. So technology risk, is a project going to work? Is something going to come along tomorrow that works even better and kind of cannibalize what we're supporting? And often the risk that causes us the greatest challenge, and which Nicola alluded to, is that kind of offtake risk. How do we get comfortable with the long-term revenue? Which is really difficult to predict. What any forecasting that takes you out more than 2-3 years is a challenge. And I think where UK policy has really supported the industry in the past is been in its, the brilliant subsidies that we've seen in the UK. So at the moment those exist through CFD, and that's really kind of bolstered a lot of the more established technologies, and I think will continue to support. But it doesn't fit everything, it doesn't support everything, and nor should it. So I think the gap for us is, how do we provide a funding solution that works where we haven't got, I won't call it the easy option, but the easier option where the revenue is supported. So that might be through working with corporates to see if we can put in place some sort of corporate purchasing solution so that we can see out the long term. Or as lenders, we have to be brave and understand what a merchant, non-contracted world looks like. That's easier for some things than for others. So it's much easier in an electricity world where we know it's a tried and tested market. There's lots of people who can tell you what power prices are going to do over the next 20 years. But for some of the newer technologies, say for something like hydrogen, you can get yourself perfectly comfortable with the project and its offtake. But what happens if that off-taker falls over, if something goes wrong? It's that kind of that what-if scenario that I think is really challenging for some of the new technologies that are coming out.
Yeah. Financing by financial institution of innovative solution. That's really a challenge. I don't wonder whether anyone else has some idea about policies that are in the way to make that happen. Orstein, perhaps?
Well, so being a global company in a global business, we compete with companies all around the world. And that means that you could have quite progressive regulation, limiting the amount of CO2. Can put requirements on energy use, etc. If that happens, if you're here in the UK or in Norway or EU, then you will be outcompeted by someone that does not have that regulation. So that means that you will need to have kind of global policies in order to have a kind of a global equal playground for everyone. And the benefits for my industry, which is the shipping industry, is that we have such a body, the International Maritime Organization. It's a UN organization that can set those policies and regulation. Of course, the challenge with that is that you need to make sure that you have some sort of consensus between all the nations in the world, and that means that it can take time, and it will most of the time not be as ambitious as you wanted. But you're actually able to do that, and when that is happening, you get a commitment from all over the world to have the same kind of regulation and the same kind of policies, which is extremely important, because the challenge is that if a certain regulation happens in the UK or happens in EU or happens in Norway, that means that we will not be able to operate there, and that's one of the challenges that has been flagged for European Union as well, because the politicians in the EU is quite keen on regulating, right? So that means that at the moment we have, for our industry and for any other, you have multiple different regulations only valid in the EU. So that means that if a ship comes into EU, you need to pay more than if your ship comes into another region. And that loses the competitiveness of being in the EU. And that means that you cannot compete, or you're worse off if you compete with Chinese or other American or other companies. So that's why I think that in order to make things happen, you need to have those policies on a global level. Because if you have a very progressive country that wants to implement a very progressive policy and regulation in order to push a certain technology or hamper or kind of cut emissions more aggressively, then you cannot operate there. You lose competitiveness. So that's kind of our perspectives on policies and challenges and regulations.
Yeah, I would like to. So that's basically cooperation within the sector. So cooperation between competitors, so to say, which is of course a sensitive topic.
Or not between competitors. It's a kind of an international regulation that is valid for all.
But I think the key point, and you see it also in the wider ESG space, that there's a call for collaboration between competitors in a certain sector in order to make certain things happen. So I wonder, if you see similar trends of collaboration with your competitors in order to achieve certain things in be it energy efficiency or innovations that may promote energy transition.
Yeah, we look at a lot of cross-industry collaboration. So, for example, we're part of the Refresh Alliance as part of the Coca-Cola system, which brings together a body of cross-industry partners to gain purchasing power into renewable energy and make that transition smoother.
All right. Now that you are talking, let's say, is there anything else you can say what large corporates in general can do to drive the energy transition?
Yeah, it leads in quite nicely. I'd say there are three things. So the first one is to say large corporates can't do it on their own. So I mentioned earlier that 90% of our emissions are scope 3. So we have to collaborate. We have to work really closely with our suppliers and cross-industry partners to be able to decarbonise. That can be through things like the Refresh Alliance, or with our key suppliers, we work on having them set their own targets and say, it's a precedent to working with us that you need to have your own targets in place to decarbonise your business, because that in turn will decarbonise ours. The second thing is you just have to start, I would say. So you have to accept that you don't have all the answers, but you have to set ambitious targets. So we've set a target to say we will decarbonise our business and reach net zero by 2040. It's very, very ambitious. And we don't have all the answers, but what we do know is how to start. And so we've got started. In the past, between 2024 and 2026, we're spending €405 million on decarbonisation initiatives. And that's using existing technology. That's moving to electric fleets, that's moving to renewable energy. It's things outside of energy, like moving to recyclable packaging. So it's across all of our scope of emissions. And we've set those targets. We have a roadmap, and we're working towards an interim target of 30% reduction by 2030. And then the third thing, which is my favourite bit to talk about, is, as I just said, accept that you don't have all the answers. You don't need to have all the answers, and we can't do it alone. So my role within the ventures team is to say, if we're going to decarbonise, we have to use new technologies. And my role is to find a way to work with those new technologies that is innovative and different, that gives them the space to grow and develop and work with us. So we've invested at a very early stage in new technologies. And if I give you an example that relates to energy, we've invested in a company called Pipeline Organics. They are creating electricity from wastewater using enzymatic biofuel cells. And we've invested in them when they're still in their lab phase, they're still in R&D. We've given them some funding, and we're allowing them to test on one of our production sites, which allows them to drastically de-risk their technology by testing and learning with us, so that when they come to us and say, okay, we want to run a full-scale pilot now, our engineering teams are comfortable with them, we understand the risks, they've significantly de-risked, and it makes it much easier for a corporate like ours to go and work with them. And we're doing that across our value chain. It's not just in energy. And I would encourage all corporates to find a way to work with early stage innovation, because that early stage innovation is the only way that we will all manage to decarbonise fully.
Can I add something onto this? So, like the question as to like what can big corporates do? So, LVMH in France is one of our larger customers. Now, in particular, we work with Moet Hennessy, and 92% of their emissions come from glass production, which is a fairly dirty business, but they don't actually produce any glass. That all comes from their suppliers. So they also want their suppliers to be more environmentally friendly, but then the suppliers say like, yeah, great, we also want so, but like, what do we do? Like, what do you want us to do? So what we did with them is we looked at, okay, which glass chemistries are emerging that are actually less CO2 intensive, and what are all the other technologies out there, either well-established or emerging, that we could use to strengthen glass, shape it differently to make it thinner, so we need to make less of it. And what they actually did is they gently but firmly nudged their suppliers in the direction of the technologies that may provide solutions that we identified. So I think you as a big corporate, you can be more in the driver's seat, because if you're big enough and your suppliers also depend on you to a large extent, then your suggestion can weigh quite heavily. And it's not that they don't want to find a solution, but they also don't necessarily know what exactly to do.
And we are one of the big Scope 3 contributors. So when we transport Coca-Cola, we don't carry Coca-Cola on the tanks, but we could. But that means that we will be one of the. We transport probably a lot of the products that goes into Coca-Cola or into others. That's your Scope 3, and that is an emission that is outside of your control, right? So you need to kind of ask the suppliers to see what, as you mentioned, what kind of technologies, what can you do in order to bring that down. So and we do that the same with our suppliers. We trying to collaborate with within the industry, especially on our big Scope 3, which is the production of fuel. For us, and we ourselves are a big Scope 3 source for multiple of other businesses. So I think that the challenge is that this is outside of your control. You cannot control the Scope 3. So as you mentioned, if there's no net zero glass available, you need to just take the best that you can get. And if you're not able to decarbonize shipping, you will not be able to be net zero before you can have all of the Scope 3 net zero as well. So it's a fine balance. And I'm not too pessimistic, because if everyone's focusing on their own Scope 1, that means that that's someone else's Scope 3. So then we will solve the problem.
Just a final one, though, because this is really interesting, because it kind of connects us all. Because actually the corporates here and Yard actually drive on innovation. So the access to real demonstrations, real pilots, that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And that then increases the TRL level, like the access to a ship for a wind demonstration, or that's amazing.
Yeah.
And they are the enabling factors. That's the kind of fuel that
actually,
pushes
it
along.
reminds me in each corporate charter, there should be an obligation to, before you make an investment, that you make up your mind, does this investment promote innovation in the energy transition, for example? Katie, from a banking perspective, I know this example. I mean, what kind of role a bank can play. I know this example in the Netherlands where the bank said we only finance buildings if they have energy label C at a certain moment in time, which led to a big transformation of that sector. Do you have any other examples on that?
Yeah, so I think if you sort of wind back maybe 5 years or so, green finance for the banks was very much, what are we doing to fund renewable energy? And it was wind and solar, and battery was coming in, but it was very traditional renewables with a bit of flexible. I think now when we as a group look at what we're doing towards our own green finance targets, yes, renewables and energy is still a really big part of that, but other parts of the bank's activities have caught up and are accelerating. So absolutely, real estate is a really good example, whether that's commercial real estate where we're looking to support buildings that have a better EPC rating, or whether it's things that we're doing through our mortgage division to allow homeowners to access support for energy efficiency. We do lots in sustainable linked loans, so where we're supporting corporates to do their bit to improve. As Nicola said, it doesn't need to be perfect, but any improvements, we can help sort of incentivize that and adjust the pricing to support that. And then also more broadly for corporates, we're looking at different funding solutions to help those energy efficiency measures. So traditionally, banks are looking to see how their debt is going to be repaid by income being generated. I think there's a different route where you're looking at energy efficiency to say, for the bank to say, how is our debt going to be repaid by the savings that you can make by inputting those in energy efficiency measures? So I think it's becoming a very healthy and increasingly healthy mix of all sorts of things that contribute towards green finance. And we are trying to be more flexible, to do more, to do different, and to really support our customers.
That's good. That's great stuff. So let's turn to the audience. Questions already? Yeah, okay. Because before I get there, I just wanted to get an idea. If I ask you, which will drive energy transition most? And first of all, I ask you, renewable energy, who would raise their hands? A couple of them. Okay, second, what about energy efficiency? Will that drive most? Also a couple of hands. And what about digitalization? Anyone who believes in that? Not too many, not too many hands. So, questions here? Do you have a microphone?
Hi, great panel actually. Good to see a diverse mix of industry, banking, all in the same table. Very, very impressive. So the first question is really around, we have heard about a lot of innovative technologies and adoption of that. And in the last 2 or 3 months, everyone is talking about generative AI, large language models. What do you see the real impact of this generative AI and LLM on energy transition? And just as introduction, I'm Sunil Ramakrishnan. I'm a consulting partner for Tata Consulting Services for UK. Work with most of the large companies in UK on sustainability. So very, very looking forward to hearing from this esteemed panel.
Yeah, great question. Because I immediately think, does that increase the speed of innovation?
Yeah, certainly. So, AI in all shapes and forms, like when we look at its rate of improvement, it is by far the fastest improving technology that humankind has ever seen throughout all of our history. And what that means is that it's most definitely not hype, what you're seeing around now, and it's going to get a lot better very fast, and it's going to get weird real soon. And exactly how that's going to play out in all of the various areas where you may apply it is difficult to say exactly, but that it will accelerate everything and that it's going to happen fast and viciously, that I'm absolutely certain of.
So to give some examples from our industry, I think that predictive not necessarily large language models. Creates a lot of efficiency with regards to our corporate functions, but the machine learning element is something that we are looking at for predictive maintenance. That's one topic. We use it for cybersecurity to learn machine learning to learn our systems. Highly efficient, extremely efficient. We use it for the sales that I mentioned, for the sales to learn how the ships is operating. We have also machine learning algorithms to learn how the ships is operating in various different sea states, combined with weather predictions in order to reduce the movement of the rudder in order to make the ship more efficient. So there's all of these kind of small things that you can actually do where you can get the computers to learn, or artificial intelligence or machine learning to learn how things are operating and predict that to improve efficiency. So that's why I raised my hand on energy efficiency, because I think that of course there's multiple of these energy alternatives, but energy efficiency is something that you can do today. So that's where and how we think that AI and machine learning can contribute to that.
We have 10 minutes. We have plenty of time.
I think just from an alternative perspective, actually, AI is interesting because actually it gives massive potential benefits, but also the energy demand that it's going to actually require to enable it is enormous. Currently in data centers, you're looking at 50 kilowatt racks, and NVIDIA have just kind of put out that they want to go to 1 megawatt racks. So now you're looking at rooms, just rooms in a data center that are going to be 50 megawatts, 100 megawatt rooms. So the size of kind of what would be a normal power plant 10, 15 years ago. But the benefit of that is you also see Microsoft establishing a power purchase agreement with 3 Mile Island in a nuclear fission to open that up. So it's hard to know actually where the net positive or negative will be.
What I'm curious about is whether AI helps you with advancing development of fusion.
It can, but it's still a bit away from the practical real benefits for us. I can see, it's actually still at a technology basis for us, where the unknown unknowns is actually the really interesting part. And until we find, there's lots of different algorithms out there, but ultimately, how you can control a fusion reactor using AI is not there yet.
And if I can just make a comment on that as well, because in order to get the fuel that we will need going forward, we will need an enormous amount of green energy to do that. And just to give you an example of the scale of that. So the total amount of non-fossil energy that was produced last year was about 12,000 terawatt hours. If you wanted to do shipping green, running on green ammonia, for example, to use electrical power for that, you would need half that energy. So about 50% of that, 5,400 terawatt hours. So the EEI came out a couple of months ago with a new report predicting with data centers, and that the consume for data centers would reach 1,000 terawatt hours. That means that just for doing AI, will require the 1/5 of the energy that will require to decarbonize all of shipping. So that means that we're not only talking about energy transition, we need to talk about massive energy addition. So all the things that we are scaling up all the time, that is just to just cope with the demand. With the climate change that we see now, the enormous amount of energy that is required as just for air conditioning. So I recommend the last report from the International Energy Agency, where they also show the massive step from 2023 to 2024. The biggest step and increase in demand for electrical power that has been historically.
Which emphasizes the need to be more efficient than ever. Another question.
Yeah, just one more. I'm Enya. I'm a startup scouter for Open Innovation Programs, and my question is related to these, to Open Innovation Programs and pilots with startups. What are the main challenges that you face when running them? Nicola already mentioned one, which is the cost and how startups funders have adapted to these by offering energy as a service or other business models. And also, what are some of the green flags of that you see in founders when collaborating with them?
Yeah, so I would say some of the biggest challenges are the different ways in which corporates and startups operate. So you're dealing with large corporates that have big infrastructure, lots of processes to get through, and they're really looking for established technologies that they're very comfortable with and know how to implement with minimal risk. And when you start talking to a startup founder that has a brand new technology, very, very little processes, they've not considered how they're going to work with a corporate, and it's incredibly high risk. There's a lot of tension there, and there's a lot of pain points. And I think without a dedicated unit like ours in Ventures to be able to work with startups, corporates would really, really struggle, because you need someone in the middle that can navigate that across the system. So we're able to work with our different departments internally in the corporates and say, look, these startups have technology that can have a significant impact on helping us decarbonize, but we have to find a way to work with them. We need to have a higher risk tolerance. We need to be more agile. We need to be able to be faster. And that's our job, is to be able to bridge that gap between startup and corporate. And when it's done well, it can work really, really well. And in terms of what are the green flags that I look for? So when I'm looking at technologies, the first thing is, how impactful can it be? So really, we're strategic investors. We would say, is this technology going to be something that, if it was implemented, would 80% of people be disappointed if it was removed afterwards? And if that criteria can't be met, then we would move on. And then it's about assessing the technological risk and how comfortable we are with it. But the biggest thing for me is the founders and the teams behind it. And, are these people the right people to deliver for this startup? Can they make it happen? Do they have the skills required to work with a corporate and to scale from, in the lab all the way through to a Series B company?
Final question.
Yes, hi. I'm wondering, maybe for Liam specifically, this infinite energy of fusion in the hands of humans that have been destroying the world for the last century, aren't you afraid of what it could bring? And are you working with policymakers to ensure that regulation comes at the right time, at the right pace to, protect the use of that?
That's a really good question, actually, and very, very straight. Yes, we are working with policymakers. Actually, we're working with policymakers to have a pragmatic kind of transition for energy. Some countries, and actually the UK is quite forward in its policy for fusion. It looks at it and regulates it like a medical accelerator type approach because it's inherently safe. I think the other core of your question, though, is that kind of word maybe that you latched on to, limitless potential. Yes, it has that limitless potential. It's the power of the sun. However, the supply chain, the rollout, the capacity to actually deliver thousands of fusion power plants, that is a monumental challenge. And so actually what you're looking at is you're going to be looking at first-of-a-kind systems and then nth-of-a-kind systems. And as we learn on intermediate devices, first-of-a-kind and nth-of-a-kind systems, we're going to be learning and transitioning over time. That's not going to happen at the rate of something like a software like AI. That's actually going to happen over 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And ultimately society has an opportunity to understand the technology and to start adapting to how we can actually properly use that. That's kind of my own opinion on what we see here really going forward. But fundamentally, at the moment, fusion is regulated through the government, through DESNZ, in an approach that we feel is quite pragmatic and sensible.
Wow, I think it was really a great discussion. We're almost out of time. So I would like to give each panelist 30 seconds for the following question. What's the one action the energy sector must take now to accelerate the transition?
I think we have to really support new technologies. I think putting in more wind power, more solar farms will only deliver so much, and it's the likes of things like nuclear, trying these new technologies that will really accelerate the energy transition.
I think it's move away from a risk-based approach to an opportunities-based thinking, actually. We look at everything from the risks as a society, as a kind of a culture, but actually it's opportunities based. If we take it on an opportunity based thinking, actually that changes the whole value for a lot of the things we look at.
Oh, Oystein?
Yeah, for me it's energy efficiency, because the best and cheapest energy is the one that we're not using. So you can do what you can do today with the measures that is available today to reduce energy consumed.
I think as Europeans, we have to get back in the game. So like everything related to the energy transition, the Chinese are dominating everything. Why? Because they looked ahead and they bet on what's next and went all in on it, and now they dominate. So trying to compete with that, I think, is largely a fool's errand. So what we need to do is, again, look ahead, skip to the next big thing, go all in on that, and like actually do it rather than just talk about it.
Wonderful. Katie?
We need the government to conclude their review of electricity market arrangements, REMA, because we need the UK to continue to be a brilliant place for international investors to focus their time and energy and resources.
Thank you, amazing. So let's wrap this up. So I think we heard a lot of things. It's super exciting about fusion power, collaborations, breaking barriers, financing. So my challenge to you as an audience would be, if you head out tonight, make one connection, or champion one idea to drive the energy transition, because it's clear only together we can make this net zero happen. So a huge thank to Nicola, Liam, Oystein, Jart, and Katie, and to you, the audience. I would give them a big round of applause. And if you want, we can have a chat later on during the drinks. Thank you all.